So I don't really know what to think about this whole Prince Andrew thing, but the BBC have just put literally 5 hours ago, so that was like 12. So that was this evening, around 7 o'clock ish. So they've just put out that Andrew actually is officially stripped of his Prince title, not just the Duke of York. So that the MP Rachel Maskell was doing, well, I suppose you could call it a petition. She was getting everyone to fill a form in and email their MP to do something about Prince Andrew's Duke of York title, not his Prince title. And now apparently they've actually taken his Prince title, but he's been in and out of the papers for the last few years anyway. You know, 1 minute, you know, he's 1 minute he's on the naughty chair, then he isn't, then he is, then he isn't, then he is, and don't seem to have made their minds up about it. And then it always just seems to be always back again, then he's not. There's whatever the press seem to say, everyone just seems to copy it now. So, you know, just because it's in the press or the press say this or that and everyone does it. But the Good Law Project shared, it was basically like, it was like a petition that you filled in basically and signed it, but you sent it to your own MP. It is a petition because you're asking your MP to do something, right, officially in writing. But it was organised by Rachel Maskell, who is meant to be independent. She was previously a Labour Party, but she's meant to be independent now, the MP for York. I actually telephoned up to complain that it's not just this issue, it's like we're getting blocked and everything, like all the normal petitions that we submit, we keep getting blocked. I submitted petitions about honours and they got rejected, yet this is about honours, right? And effectively it's the same thing, a petition asks MPs to act on something, and she's asking everyone to ask their MP to act on something. So I did fill the form in, but I didn't actually focus it on Andrew himself, right? It's all about the processes and procedures. They will never do proper processes and procedures, and I get annoyed with it. So actually I complained about the fact that, you know, I'd done a few petitions about knighthoods and orders of knighthood. And to be honest, I don't actually necessarily have a problem with the orders of knighthood, other than most of them are all corrupt, right? So almost like the ringwraiths in Lord of the Rings, because they all seem to be in on this Bill Gates world global domination plan. You know, whether it's Tony Blair or Nick Clegg or, whoever it is, even Patrick Stewart, in a way, I know that he's an actor, but, you know, he did the Starship Enterprise, and in a way, it's flagshipping a certain sort of governance model, but advertising it through a program, you know, like, you know, Starfleet Command and number 1 and number 2 and number 3 and, you know, all this kind of uniform sort of, you know, this is how the future is going to be. I think they use pictures like that. In fact, I'm sure he didn't get knighted for the role in that show, you know. And then you've got Elton John, who's knocking out songs and tunes, and you know, Tom Jones as well. You know, they're all. Not all of them, not every single night, but there you know, Starmer, you know, he's the Prime Minister now. He was deeply involved in the Crown Prosecution Service, right, when they were prosecuting people unlawfully against our privileges. So there's some sort of connection to the Knights of the Empire, the British ones, and these global agendas, because Nick Clegg, you know, he was the global president of Facebook, right? And the BBC advertised Facebook to the BBC. I know that it was the BBC ultimately, because a hell of a lot of people listen to Radio 1 and Radio 2, right? And I specifically remember when I was out for work, you know, and on the radio, they pitched it, right? It was Facebook. And, you know, otherwise, you know, why would I have gone on there? I wouldn't have gone on there, but apparently it was the latest, coolest thing and everyone was building a profile. And that's digital identity. It's creating a digital identity, right? So, and then, you know, Blair's always been pushing digital ID and, you know, his whole Fabian circles. So, I mean, So the only really I put a few petitions about breaking up the knighthood orders, but mainly because of who, not what it is, but who's in it, and what have their objectives been. Mainly like Keir Starmer and Tony Blair at the moment, and other than that, there's some, and then I don't think this is actually big enough news, but someone put on their page the other day that there has been an official announcement from Bill Gates about his intentions for global international governance and ID, right? Which it's got to be election propaganda, because a foreign entity is not allowed to affect the voting of people in England, right? Not based on a political agenda or basis or something, right? And we've actually fought for our laws and rights through many, many wars and things like that, and people have died for them. So, the fact that, and it's an advertisement. If you read the House of Lords debate on election propaganda, this is exactly what it is. It even tells you that there are a lot more, even extra things that they didn't even mention, but they set out the basis for it. And the basis is foreign jurisdictions having an influence on English voting and elections and policies, and also, affecting us, not just jurisdictions, but they have imposed with jurisdictions. They've imposed with Facebook and YouTube policy overreach, but our own police now at the moment, we've got a couple of knights. There's a few knights who are police chiefs, like Greater Manchester Police. I think he's called Watson, actually. He's just seized someone's. He's intervening in elections. He took a minority political party vehicle and crushed it when the adverts on it are meant to be exempted from acts of law. And it's police using flexing muscles and power when they're not actually supposed to get involved in elections or interfere with the and all that material in vehicle was paid for by the political party, so it's in the public interest. The members of the party have donated towards that. That's the thing. And these police chiefs are flexing their muscles. And to be honest, I think they just want a piece of the action. They see people having fun with political adverts, like the Tories were doing with Ed Miliband with his CNN, MSC Saatchi, whatever it's called, CNS Saatchi or CNN Saatchi advert. They never prosecuted the Tories, right? Not for harassment of Ed Miliband. But then when, Paul Golding and Britain First is ridiculing Starmer, then they go after him, and they just want to play. It's like a cat playing with a ball, but you're not allowed to. You're not actually allowed to take or seize election materials and vehicles. You're not allowed to, intervene or sway the public from supporting political parties. When Facebook had put a block up when you were searching for Paul Golding, and then those Hope Not Hate groups had edited all Wikipedia, which is a foreign American platform. So when you search for some political party leaders, it's got all this election propaganda about them on an American website. That's election propaganda, and I complained to MI5 about it. The police said that they were going to actually stop reporting these non-hate crimes, which was, it was a lot of nonsense in the first place, but I thought that was a move forward. But I thought they were going to let Paul Golding and his vehicle go, but they're not. It's just ridiculous. And the irony is that, the police are doing that against the minority political party, but on Facebook, all of the MPs, all of the main party MPs, not every single one of them, but let's say that a majority percentage of them, well over half, it could possibly well be, over 80% of them, but, I won't say all, but nearly all. They've all got Facebook pages and social media. Now, not all of them have links to it on their Parliament page. but many of them advertise and promote those privately owned platforms, and they're for profit. So they're like the BBC, they're helping Mark Zuckerberg make money and profit. And I suppose Elon Musk now as well, and Parliament contact pages are supposed to have a phone number which doesn't advertise a company. Phone numbers are transferable, and they're supposed to have an address, and then an email of Parliament, taxpayers' email, which is at parliament.uk, a government one, right? And you'd never seen anything like it before in history, when they're actually encouraging people to go on these platforms, use them, create digital ID identities, and actually making money for those private platforms. And it's these platforms' policies that actually have been invading our rights. And when they use a forced policy, which makes you submit consent and accept and impose it on us, when no one really is going to get any court action, the only time there's court action is if the police intervene in a particular crime, but they don't actually really have anything to do with the platform itself. But it's these platforms' actions, activities and policies, the framework of it, which actually is imposing on UK elections and affecting... but you're not going to get into court through those activities and challenge them on European Convention of Human Rights, the right to privacy, because you need the criminal case where the right to privacy is being infringed upon, right? And it's actually the accepting of their policies, which actually, it's not the main activity on the platform whereby you post or say something. It's the fact that all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes of them gathering data on you and assessing you and surveilling you and firing adverts back at you, which might be distressing or stressful or worrying or just intimidating, and gathering data on people and then actually selling it to private companies. All that's against the right to privacy on European Convention of Human Rights. And then they've got this Section 230 American law, which does not apply in England, but yet they've all been behaving and acting as if it does, and that is a threat to the democratic processes of England. My channel got taken down when it was privilege of Parliament, parliamentary processes. Evidence seized, that's a contempt. That was Section 230 being unlawfully imposed within England. But this is the thing, nothing's been yet done about that. Now, the Online Safety Act and English law came into effect, and apparently, when I actually looked into it, they can't enforce that law on people in America. It's not possible if you've got a website in America, because you're not under English jurisdiction. Instead, the Ofcom enforce it through disruption, right, or third-party mediator services, possibly maybe like, Google UK or whatever, things like that. But they only ought to do fines, Ofcom, and they've actually managed to coerce, and I don't know how the English government have done it and what deal they've done with America, but they've managed to coerce, and Rand Paul is always going about bending the knee, right? They've managed to get all these American, adult sites and a lot of the, other ones as well, to update their websites for English users, so you've got to log in and put biometrics, right? When there's already parental controls on every hub in every house, and there's already parental controls on every mobile phone that you buy a kid, right? So it's just kind of, I think it's sort of ridiculous, really, what they've done, because what that's doing is that the same of what America has been doing to us with this Section 230 overreach and illegal policy in the UK, which, even though we're in England, they're not supposed to apply it, and it's actually quite a very serious crime and offence. It's more what they've actually been doing, the effects of what they've been doing, hindering, seizing, removing and slowing down the popularity and progress of English petition campaigns independent petition campaigns, not under election law. The right to petition, it's not election law. It's not Class C election law, right? It's the right to petition. And that's more serious than Julian Assange, you know, letting a video clip about some soldiers get out and shooting some people. You know, military kill people all the time, right? You know, there were loads of deaths from military warfare. What happened to Julian Assange? All that, the whole global escapade of it, the whole story of it, the whole hype of it, you know, and the whole ordeal that he had to go through. And then, you know, he got locked up, and then all these stories and that and so forth, because of a military video clip, right? When the military are only the public authorities, they might have particular law for disclosure of, you know, secret operations and stuff like that. But when you read the Human Rights Act, 1998, when I checked up on the military, they're only a public authority, right? Even though they're a public authority that's armed. They're licensed to be armed, but they're still only a public authority, and the police are a public authority. The courts are a public authority. The Crown Prosecution Service are a public authority. You know, Ofcom, anything that's been given statutory powers, except in Section 6.6, it is when you're doing the process of laying a bill before Parliament, or anything, you know, the processes and procedures of putting legislation or a bill or change of law before Parliament, which is petitioning Parliament, right? Because you petition for private bills. So that's the right to petition from the 1688 Bill of Rights. It's not regarded as a public authority because it's privilege of Parliament, right? It's distinctly separate. So when Suella Braverman's going on about, you know, the Human Rights Act and privileges, actually it's all figured in there to have them separate. So I don't know what nonsense she's talking about. And then, you know, but our own government are enacting against us European Convention of Human Rights. They're acting against the right to life. By, you know, this assisted suicide nonsense and abortion, and then they've been allowing and inviting foreign platforms to invade our right to privacy. You know, they encourage Facebook through the BBC, and now they're advertising it all over MP's Contact. And then the irony is that, you know, they have no respect for the Human Rights Act, but then when they want to use it, or when they want to call it out, you know, these refugees manage to get all these lawyers and get into courts and do all these cases and say, oh, we've got the right to be here as much as anyone else or whatever, then they use that as an excuse to scrap it when they've been totally disregarding it anyway. And any process that you could use in the courts to raise incompatibility with it, you don't get into court, because how they've been taking over the human rights, the ECHR, the Human Rights Convention, they've been doing it through foreign corporate entities who don't use courts against us. You got to understand how they've been doing it. They've been taking away the right to privacy so they don't have to go to court, right? You don't get into court with YouTube and Facebook. They don't see anyone in court. You know, they don't have to, because they're reaching from overseas. They're not even in this court. Right? They've got an office, right? You know, they've got Google offices and stuff like that. But it's all based and headquartered from overseas, and their main platforms are launched from overseas and reach out from overseas and impose these rules on us which aren't even English law, and they coerce you to submit consent and accept, but it's illegal, right? And you don't even get to take them to court over it through those processes. And when the police turn up, you know, if you've said something naughty, it's they're only interested in the thing that you've done, not in the process or means or how you know Facebook looking at your private data on your phone is it's not you posting it openly on the internet, right? It's a different aspect to how they're operating, so that they're managing to dodge and evade this legal liability. But what we're getting with this Online Safety Act is we're getting this, like, now cross-cooperation, right? So when they put the Online Safety Act in, which apparently they enacted it, you know, way back, I don't know if it was Rishi Sunak Parliament or before, right? So they already planned that. So they've got America bending the knee, or as Rand Paul says, so they've got Americans kind of like yielding to law that's not even in effect in America, right? Just like, agreeing to do all these things that is not even the law in America, while they've been imposing and enforcing it on us here, which is kind of like supposedly what Big Brother Watch said, how they were operating during the pandemic, and it's totally illegal how they've done it, and they're trying to create this environment where there isn't really in America or in England, yet you've got these two governments coming up with these separate laws. It's almost like, in England and Scotland or something like that, but it's like this no man's land region, or this sort of cyberspace, but the supposedly these platforms are meant to apply different laws depending on what country you're in, and so forth, different laws for different countries. To be honest, I don't know how the Americans even let that CDA 1996 get past them anyway. If online and the internet is taking precedence for the main contact, like the main communication method in the modern world, and telephone has fallen to second place, or even the post, the mailman's fallen to second place, and the main means of communication is the internet, right? Then, admittedly Donald Trump, agreed that, in one of his videos, he said that they needed digital online Bill of Rights or whatever, but I don't think that I can't believe, with all the Americans who like to do all these lawsuits and sue people, I don't know how they didn't get that 1996 CDA withdrawn or cancelled or declared void, because it actually takes away the freedom of speech for your constitutional rights, supposedly, so they can just take stuff down and remove it, right? Which is ridiculous. I mean, And I think their Bill of Rights is a lot misunderstood. I think it's meant to be for their political processes, like our Bill of Rights is for ours, and freedom of the press is the right for anyone to place an advert and use the press as a medium, like the telephone or the post. And they misconstrue it, so it's like for Rupert Murdoch, or for Bill Gates, or for Jeff Bezos. That's what that right's for, so the press can say and do what they want. But it isn't. The freedom of the press is for everyone to use it freely without discrimination, or to be obstructed from using it, like not obstructed from using the telephone. That's what it's actually for. And what we find out in England is that all of the main newspapers, which Parliament like, Papers Please or whatever, Boris Johnson's got his column in the newspaper, all important people read it. We were priced out of the adverts. They scrapped the model for classified free ads, which you could do petitions in. I've seen them because I've been through all the newspaper archives and got loads of samples and specimens of what sort of things are in there. And they started charging us tax on them as well, on the newspaper, illegally. So the government have been getting taxed illegally for political campaigns when it's a small body. Both small and large bodies are exempt. Large bodies have to be registered with government, small ones don't, but you're exempt by that is political material, not exempt by how big or small you are, right? But yet everyone seems to be that it's only exempt from, if you're this registered large company or whatever, but that's just tosh. So we actually were, in England, we didn't have any, well, we were, you did have a freedom to use the press, but they priced us out of it, and Trinity Media Press won't even reply or speak to me, and they won't talk about the tax either. They won't discuss it, because obviously if they start talking about it, that's evidence. You're getting evidence on them, right, if they're statements. So Trinity Media Press won't even speak to me or reply to me, so Trinity Media Press are not giving freedom of the press, that's for sure. Although I did try to get a free advert out of them. I was trying to argue a free one, or really cheap classified. I admit that but then they just stopped replying or speaking to us at all. So now, what have we got? Well, Bill Gates is wanting to do this global digital ID government, and I don't know why that is not the biggest news story, unless the woman who put it, unless it's yesterday's news and an old news, but she definitely put it there as if, like, it's actually now, it's like, people have suspected it or talked about it or there's been rumours, but now it's like official statement sort of thing. But, like, Rand Paul, who's like a Republican senator, he's apparently introduced a bill into Congress where he's opposing digital ID. I don't know whether that'll get passed or not when, Bill Gates himself is American. But it's the idea of it. So the fact that, Keir Starmer and Tony Blair and all these people, and also Nick Clegg, people like that, Knights of the Empire, were all behind this and have all sort of been working and orchestrating all these type of, Facebook things and, the government and, MPs contact pages and all this type of thing to go in line with all that. If the announcement coming from an American, American news, when American news say, oh, Bill Gates is going to do a digital ID thing, and then people in England, vote on that, even if it's their own MPs who support it or not, it's actually a foreign influence, because it's like if people in England are like, oh, there's this big force and there's no other option, or it's been imposed or whatever, and everyone like votes for that is a foreign company, business and entity pitching how to vote in the UK or what to vote for in the UK, right, in terms of policy, and that's actually meant to be illegal. That is what the House of Lords election propaganda debate is actually about, foreign influences on elections, right, and voting and jurisdiction. And Bill Gates wants to introduce a foreign... Bill Gates wants to create a new jurisdiction for the planet, really. Bill Gates wants to invent a new government, invent a new jurisdiction, I guess, like the Americans created their own country, but for the whole world, I suppose. Now, I think it's a bit cheeky after all, people that have gone to war and died, and the fact that we've been paying for the military all these years, and having all these other skirmish wars for these, when it's a lot of it's been about oil and resources, and challenging Putin on his resources, and all these Middle East wars and what you call skirmishes or this and that, Vietnam and all this and that, when the whole time, these big corporate powerful entities, have got McDonald's empires, all over the world and things like that, and they're doing handshakes with a lot of these other countries, have actually been thinking, hey, yeah, let's have a global world government and take over the world. So then they've been using our military, our soldiers, our taxpayers' money, really, to muscle and manoeuvre, not to defend Britain, which we pay for the military to defend Britain, right? We pay for that public authority to protect and defend Great Britain from foreign threats and attacks, right? Yet, what we find out is it's been used to squeeze, pinch, and nipple twist, and poke and prod and coerce and all this NATO tosh to get what it wants for global resources. Like Putin's, minerals, or, Middle East's problems that we get ourselves involved in, rather than, quarantining them off and letting them try to resolve it themselves until they've come to some sort of conclusion or something, right? And then all the rest of it, and a lot of it's to do with business enterprises and things like that, So, and then, I'm on that Fiverr website, and it's an absolute nightmare having like an international. I try and select UK. You can select just search in the UK now only, but there's a lot of people pretending they're in the UK when they're not. This is why they want digital ID, because it's a nightmare on there, and there's all these different nationalities. Like that Scammer Payback is an example of that, with all these different nationalities who are actually quite a nightmare to deal with. They've got a very different idea of, conduct and behaviour in business, but also at the same time, there's a new conduct and behaviour being imposed, which is block ban, Like, there's a lot of American sellers who have actually, under this new Mark Zuckerberg philosophy, which is, speak to my hand because my face ain't listening philosophy, and it's been introduced and encouraged by Facebook and Zuckerberg and YouTube, and it goes against all the business principles of consumer rights and trading standards and everything like that, right? And, they're not going to do it to Bill Gates or, to Donald Trump or whatever, when he's getting Trump Towers built or, getting his golden Nike trainers or whatever they are made, and all these other, these Trump playing cards, they don't, block Trump when he's ordering his Trump playing cards, do they? Some hairdresser in Kansas or whatever, although, saying that, they did chase Keir Starmer out of a pub in Bath, so, give them that. They did say, get out of my pub, like to Keir Starmer, but that's purely political, I suppose. But, if they were behaving like that, if you go into a shop to buy something, you just went in there and you bought you went to buy a can of Coke and they just didn't like you and they locked you out of the shop, whatever. I mean, if you haven't particularly done anything wrong or anything like that, I think they've got a lot more balls online to do stuff like that, but they just won't do it in person. But that's if everything becomes online and everything is on the internet, then, everything is going to be like, if they just want to not speak to you and stuff like that, which is really antisocial. But this actually is what we find is a type of thing that's happening in that China system, right? This is the type of thing that they're doing in China with all this, behaviour and social points, and then maybe you're not even allowed to go in there in the first place, like, if you haven't behaved, let alone anyone who want to buy up from there, even buy a can of Coke online and get it sent through the post, I don't know, whatever. But this is the thing, though. I mean, in the short parliament with John Pym, they even say, like, even people with the least tasteful of personalities or attitudes, not very nice people, are meant to be allowed to participate in politics and government, right? That's what Parliament's meant to be about. That's why it's parley. When you go to a war, when you've got two armies facing each other, they're going to fucking kill each other, right? They're going to kill hundreds of thousands of troops if they've got hundreds of thousands, and they go to talk about it first under the white flag, to see if they can come to a deal, right? They don't like each other. They're about to go to war with each other, unless it's just true that the leaders really are, in cahoots, and they're just going to send all the armies at each other to have a population cull or whatever it is, see if they can take out some of each other's populations for them and do each other a favour, right? But this is the thing when you've got this Bill Gates World Global Government, and now they're wanting to say, oh yeah, we can start aborting there isn't really a right to life, or life doesn't have a right to live, and then all these, they're really trying to crack the genders, because they're wanting, I think they're ultimately wanting. We've got to be very cautious with all these viruses now. The guy who's proposing this, Bill Gates, now has come out with it officially, supposedly. He's a guy who's got all these vaccines in his, drawers. All these, he's got all these little bugs that he can bite you and turn you into a vegetarian because you're allergic to meat. All kinds of things like threats. You wouldn't have thought that the person who happens to be proposing a global government and finance system happens to be not just a guy who sold computers to people for a side job. Oh yeah, I just make computer software. No, I also do viruses as well, particularly ones that could completely make everyone on the planet, if it gets unleashed, allergic to fucking meat or something like that. Oh, we wouldn't want that to happen now, would we? I don't know how these people get into these positions. It's just ridiculous. And then when they're definitely wanting to. They're trying. They really want to basically grow people. They want to. They want to it's so. like Star Wars Clone Wars, and then, what happens if these people have got intelligence quirks that aren't necessarily kind, or, aren't necessarily, because after all, right, this is another thing with that type of area of talk, when you're going into all these, if they're designing humans, and then they're going to plan how many women they're going to have, and they're going to plan how many men that they have, and they're going to plan what, type of nationalities there are, but now we need to break down nationalities, although they said that, everyone's got a right to a nationality, everyone's got a right to a religion, everyone's got a right to a race, but then really they're trying to make it so it's all one, order, religion and race. But when you get into that area, imagine that you did, start, grow, making humans or breeding programs when they're all really kind and, what's the word, charitable, yeah? So if they were all kind and charitable, then, they're all going to do favours for each other and help each other out, and everyone's going to get on really well, right? But can you imagine if they'd have done that at the first place? Let's rewind to, I don't know, the 1950s, right? And suddenly everyone started being really kind and generous and charitable in their caricature. Then no one would have wanted to, accumulate loads of money and have more money than anyone else. And then you wouldn't have had Bill Gates, right? So the irony of it, unless he just wants them to all be, subservient, to the, not to don't question the policies, right? Because this is a thing when you're under a corporate regime, right? Don't question the policies, just obey them, just comply with them, right? But this is the thing. If you take over the world and govern the world by YouTube and Facebook policy, don't question the policy, don't question the authority. But then you're not. If you don't challenge the authority, then you're not proposing any policy. You're not proposing policy. You're not proposing law. You're not proposing rules. You're not proposing. You don't actually. You don't get involved in making and changing laws. You just freaking follow them, right? This is the thing. So the cheek of it is preposterous, and there's a lot more complicated arguments you can extrapolate from that. We've got all these philosophers who have, there's a name for most different models of society that you could have based on different philosophies. They're already being named and discussed in all these books, which I couldn't tell you what books they are, but I know that they've got them, and people do a lot more reading than me, but you can still kind of get an idea of, what they're all about and what they're going to suggest and what the differences are, like communism versus all these other different philosophies. And it's just ridiculous. So, the thing in this country is that I think the authorities have become a problem because these think tanks and these corporate entities who like doing things under policy and administrative law have set up all these think tanks and all these not-for-profits who have then influenced and lobbied the government and have been major influences in the government, separating powers like Gordon Brown, getting rid of, House of Lords and having the Supreme Court instead for legal cases, even though they did have a Supreme Court in the first place, but it was sort of different. And all these different non-departmental government agencies, like the Advertising Standards Authority, Electoral Commission, which are all under strict administrative law and policy, and you literally having to petition them to act about something, when in the olden days, a citizen could just go and, a legal action was a lot more personal and engaged. Now the police, they're not acting on a lot of things that people report or want acted on. So actually, we're not really getting the police acting when someone reports something. When you used to, right? And that means that in a way the police have become almost a lot more like Ofcom. You're getting 70,000 complaints against Mike Graham, but nothing gets done. And you know, the police might get loads and loads of complaints, but they still might not think that someone committed a crime or might not want to take action. But, you know, it wasn't, it was a lot more like you had a lot more say in, you turn up with the money and you get a warrant and you want someone arrested and then you want to take legal action and then you direct the prosecutor before the CPS was in place. Now the CPS have got all their own processes and they have to follow these administrative policy laws whether they're not going to act or not, and they usually don't, right? Not when you want them to, or the police. But yet the police, they're flexing their muscles and they're getting their fingers stuck in now to these political activities. The police do have a role to play in election governance to make sure it's a fair election, and there are some laws to follow and some rules to follow, but it used to be under the Parliament jurisdiction, and then when they let the courts hear it, you know, there was some things that the police have got to do, like make sure the Representation of the People Act is being followed, not them themselves intervening in the elections, right? I think there are certain frauds you can have, like, you know, if one political party, you know, copies some flyers from another party and tries to rubbish them, but, you know, you could say it's opposition or whatever, but, you know, whether it's a fraud or not, that's different. A fraud, you see, like these frauds and falsities and things like that are different from when you're actually allowed to challenge something and oppose it. And I don't think the modern police as it is now in the year 2025, and it's grown up into such a huge establishment, they don't seem to be able to get their heads round that we're actually in a battle, right? Opposing. And you got a legal right to do that. And it's a fight, right? And like a boxing match, you put boxing gloves on, you put the law on. And, you know, like when the police use the law to kick doors down. And now they're getting involved politically, and they've got a press office, and they like to have their own stab at it. But they're not meant to be having their own stab at it. They're not a political party, right? The police are not a political party. So the police chief is not meant to say like, oh, you know, here's, you know, Paul Golding or whatever, he's got a political advert that's opposing Starmer, you know, he's got a political party and this is their campaign and he's going to be having candidates in election, right? And it's funny, he's like mocking Starmer just like, you know, the Conservatives mocked Ed Miliband, but I'm a police chief and I think that's funny. And, you know, it's like, oh, if we crush the Starmer van, it's like the police press office or this or that, or, you know, he wants to play with it. This is the thing, the police chief wants to be like a cat with a ball and knock it around. And I want to have a play with it as well, like little shiny little cats get attracted to mirrors, right, you know? Manchester Police, Sir Watson wants to get involved in it, right? When you're not really supposed to. And this is the thing, right? The thing with this election law ties into the whole thing that I said about, you know, Ofcom and Parliament advertising these platforms. The police are not actually acting in the things that they should be acting in and are meant to act in, right? Like, I report, you know, quite a few people reported to that Runcorn and Helsby by-election, you know, and the police never did anything. That detective constable wouldn't act, you know, that Carl, whatever he's called, DC Detective Constable Carl or whatever, he didn't do anything. And the majority of these MPs, this is what I was saying earlier when I was talking about majorities of MPs, right? They've got advertisements on their Facebook, and they've left them up there. Now, I don't think that it's like a magazine when, you know, you get the magazine, you publish the adverts in it, you pay for them, right? And it's paid for by the political party or the candidate or whatever. Like, that's not the argument, who paid for it. And then once the magazine is published, it's in print, right? And then the advert has its effect, but then you still got the advertisement. You've still got the newspaper, like a vintage newspaper, right? You can't take it out, you know, they don't go around and burn them all or rip the pages out. But, like, that's just purely because of what the medium of it is, right? If they have a radio advert, then, you know, when they play the radio advert, you hear it and then that's it, unless you personally make a recording of it or record it, but people usually don't, right? So the radio advert is paid to be heard and broadcast, and that's it. You don't hear it again, right? It goes away. It doesn't have an effect afterwards, after 14 days after the end of the election. Now, the thing with social media, right, is that you put something, you post it, and then you're supposed to take it down. It's removable. So, if you've got a Facebook page and you're trying to get elected as an MP, and you've got your advertisements up, whether it's Labour or Conservative, or even if you're independent, you're putting all these photographs up and images, and you're trying to advertise yourself and help you get elected, right? Now, you've got paid for ads, and then you've got ones that you just put up, right? But they still cost you something to make it. Someone had to sit down and design it or whatever, right? Or you had to travel somewhere to take the photograph. So there's money gone into it one way or another, even if Facebook's free to join, right? There's money gone into it, right, to get it there. Particularly when, if it involves props or printed or some element of travel, or if you're going around interviewing people with microphones, some things have been paid for in it, right? When you declare who's paid for it for running Facebook ads and Google ads, that's just for like the reach and the how many exposures that you have paid for or whatever, right? But this is the thing, they're trying to make out that they've tried to mislead people since 2005 that only Google ads and Facebook ads are adverts, right? Anything else is social media, but it's an advert, right? If it's advertising a political campaign, it is an advertisement. And that's the thing with our YouTube channels, which they can't get their head around. YouTube, right? If you're advertising a petition, it's a petition, right? And even if you have to pay for it, this is the thing. It's what it is. It's what it's for. The purpose of what it's for. Now, whether or not they're meant to, I think they're meant to take those adverts down, but it's the fact that once they get elected and when they become elected, if they win, right, if the candidate wins the election, right, they're just editing the title and saying, oh, it's like, Rachel Reeves MP now, or, David Davis MP, or, the Lib Dems is a political party. It's not, the Lib Dems are a political party. So they're always doing campaigns, but the actual person, the individual, once they become MP and then they change the title to MP, and they're actually uploading Parliament stuff like, oh, I'm doing this for Parliament, I'm doing that, or I'm talking about this, or I went on the news, or their constituents can contact them through there or leave a message or whatever, they're using it for Parliament. And this is the thing with Parliament, they're advertising these platforms on there, which have actually got the election material on their page, which Rachel Reeves was doing. And it's very unimportant, actually, if you say who's paid for it or not, or if you have paid for extra reach or whatever, because it's under parliamentary law of privilege if you're using it for Parliament, which is under election law, right? Now, they might say some things are privilege and some things aren't, but the thing is, Parliament are telling people to go in there and look at it, right, to contact their MP, but it's got advertisements to vote for that MP after the election's over. Parliament don't say, go buy the Daily Sport from December 2029 because there's a decent advert of fucking Boris Johnson in there, pulling his pants down and giving you a moonie, do they? They don't say, go buy the Times on the 12th of February, there's a great column in there of Boris Johnson on Boris Johnson's contact page, do they, right? They don't say, go buy, Top Gear magazine from, February 2008, because there's a great picture of, Ed Miliband posing for a photograph with, Gary Lineker or something, whatever, saying, vote for Labour or whatever it is. They don't do that because then they're actually, Parliament's advertising, promoting elections, right, which they're not supposed to advocate for or against a party. So it's got all mashed up. It's got all mixed up and mashed up. They've mixed the electoral class E with the parliamentary stuff from 2005, which they didn't before that because they had their own website. They had their own website. maybe they were, maybe like when they had their own website, you know, for their election campaign, and then they had it for contact for an MP a little bit before there, but maybe they forgot to take the election campaign stuff down. Maybe there was a little bit of that going on, you know, like GarethBacon.com or whatever. But, you know, you can't have it. It can't be both for the election and for the MP surgery guide, because that the MP surgery guide cannot continue to tell people to vote for one MP when it's been used by Parliament, right? So, and this is what the police aren't doing anything about that at all. The police won't act in that or do anything about it. But yet they're taking Paul Golding's van for Britain First when he isn't actually, you know, he's not elected. He's trying to get elected, and he's opposing another political party, which, you know, he's got people who are going to be candidates in elections. And I actually think that, you know, maybe the police officers are using some different law, but from what I've seen, once it's a registered party, you can do it, because that's what the party is opposing, for or against other parties, for or against other parties' candidates or policies, right? And I think it was because it was actually offensive, you know. It must have. It wasn't actually because it was Keir Starmer, because there were loads of Facebook pages with Keir Starmer on them all over, right? Loads of Facebook pages have got things mocking Keir Starmer. Facebook groups are absolutely jam-packed of Keir Starmer jokes and parodies and so forth, right? But, you know, the political party is meant to be the one that is the most permissible to do it. So, I mean, and then you've got Farage, who seems to be purposely, you know, he had his talking pints, which was privately paid for, wasn't notional or implied spending. Reform didn't say, oh yeah, by the way, we want to acknowledge that we want to dedicate this election to talking pints, which we wouldn't have won it without it, right? They didn't say that. And by the way, you know, the studio was paid for privately, and the studio lighting and the camera crew and the, you know, makeup artists and all that, Reform didn't pay for, right? So, like, you got Nigel Farage now, who is like this, and he's going on these news programs all around the world. He's like going pedal to the metal. Nigel Farage is attempting to become, you know, like one of the most famous people that have ever lived, like Tucker Carlson and, you know, Trump, and he's on that level, you know. He might even be as popular as Putin. Farage is going for the full Monty, basically, but he's doing it completely illegally. And then he's got all these people like Sarah Poachin, who are naive and susceptible and easy to be misled, who are groomed by these men, like, you know, who are like, you know, this is perfectly okay, you know, this is legal, we can do it, right? Yeah, right, just like Bill Gates can say to the whole world, oh, you know, vote for my global world takeover plan. You know, telling different countries how to vote in their elections, right, from a foreign entity. So, you know, Farage he's got to be he's purposely like, you know, he's just like, fuck it, you know, he's like, you know, you know, I think that they know there's that many laws broken, that they're just like rebelling. It's a revolution, he's leading a revolution, and, you know, if you don't follow laws, what's the point in having them? But maybe Nigel Farage is like, you know, thinking, you know, he's going to, you know, continue to push England for this, you know, Bill Gates takeover thing, because apparently they're wanting to follow this devolution plan or whatever, even if they want to change their border policies or this or that. Maybe they're all in for the governance, I don't know. But Farage is almost kind of like the biggest con man at the moment. He's like the biggest charlatan. He's the greatest showman on earth, the greatest charlatan. Everyone's believing it, and because of the nightmare of Starmer, because of the nightmare of the Labour Party, that everyone's just like cheering for Farage, because, you know, they just want rid of Labour, and therefore majority of people, when you try to explain to them about the election law, they like speak to my customer facing listening. They don't care about it. They're not interested in it. They don't want to learn the election law. They're not interested in it. And even if Farage was breaking the law, they don't care. They're not bothered because they just want to get Labour out and get Starmer out by any means necessary, right? So it's really not very it's not a very good democratic situation, because people are being misled and tricked to support someone who's completely and totally breaking the law and being encouraged to do it, and Parliament are encouraging it as well by all their contact pages and social media engagement. And because Starmer's so terrible and doing all these terrible things, that one can't be worse than the other now. And it makes you think, then it seems to be like, it doesn't matter whether you've got, ITN or Sky or, whether it's The Hill or The View or whatever program you want around the world. When these programs say, there can only be Trump or a Republican, a Tom Cruise or a Trump, or, everyone actually believes it, and that's what everyone's talking about in their videos, and then this is the cause and the effect, and it's become that, the BBC only talk about the Labour and the Tories and the Lib Dems, that everyone only thinks that they're relevant, and it's like, the storyteller, and until you start reading the story, people don't know what it is. And, when the dialogue, when the narrative is all the time about Labour and the Conservatives, it can be, they're not allowing anything else into that narrative. And then you've got, people like Graham Moore who are challenging that Runcorn Helsby by-election, Sarah Poachin, and like, he knows a lot about the Constitution, even though he just put a video out the other day. It's meant to be, he goes to the High Court, and then they're meant to send these judges to the area which it was in. But the respondents have challenged the legality of the forms, but you're meant to challenge the legality of the forms in the proceedings. Surely, you challenge that as part of the proceedings. So I really don't know what's been going on. They've allowed an appeal before something has been heard, right? When have you ever... How many civil cases are there when you appeal it before you had a decision or verdict, right? I mean, I've heard of one guy who was charged with a criminal offence turning up in a court, and he said he wanted it heard at the High Court, right? Instead, but that was as an alternative, right? And I know you've got judicial review, but you can't have a judicial review until they've done something, right? And that the processing of that case, that election petition, I thought they'd already made a decision on it, right? And it's got to be heard. Surely they challenge it after it's been heard, right? You would have thought, or after the verdict, and you can't even appeal those. It's not a proper appeal. In fact, I think you can only have a judicial review on it. You're only allowed to have a judicial review equivalent, sort of like challenging the process and procedures. But you're going to do that after you've had it, right? So it all seems a bit out of order to me. And then Graham Moore was talking about, only one person. He did make an error in his video that he put up the other day, because he said that only one person can bring it, but you can have up to 4 people sign it. It says it on the form. The form is really the most simple form that you can have, actually, other than like the Court of Sessions petition form. It's the most simplest actual legal form or court form that you can actually have. So I don't know how they managed, Sarah Poachin and her team managed to pull out that he'd made a mistake on it. They actually still have the title of the form for the Queen. They haven't even changed it to the King. The last time I looked on there, you meant to adjust it anyway to put the King, not the Queen, right? Because they'd still got it to Her Majesty. So they didn't even update the form when I looked. It's the most simplest form that you can have. You just basically fill your details in and the respondent's details, and then right what you think was wrong. I don't really know what Reform and Farage have pulled them out on that form, but it was strange that I don't think Graham Moore could have been that on the ball with it, because he said that, one person brings it, but they don't. I think that he meant that one person has brought it, that only he brought it. We can have up to 4 people who are supposed to. Up to 4 people can share the costs of it, right? But this is another thing about that election petition. He's been taking donations from everyone, right? From all his supporters and fans, right? Because, so more than one person has paid for it anyway, right? It's been paid for by hundreds of people, possibly even there might have been 1,000 people donated to it, right? But only meant to be up to 4 people can pay for the cost and bring it. But actually, when the actual money is declared to have come from multiple persons, it hasn't come from them 4 people, right? So it evades the point of, and it's not meant to be summary. It's actually meant to be a petition. That's why it's called an election petition. It's not a prosecution, and it's not a summary hearing. It's actually just meant to be to establish whether the procedure was followed correctly or not, right? Because you've also got these certificates of indemnity and things like that, which can be given out against persons who might have done something wrong or broke the law, because they're not there to bring those people to justice. They're just there to find out if the election was run properly or not, and who did or did not rightfully win, okay? So that's what it's there for. And also, Graham Moore, I think he's only challenging it on the processes and procedures. He's not challenging it on all this election propaganda that's been going on, because I don't really think he's figured in fully on and is aware of it. I've tried to contact him and tell him about it, to include it, because you've got all this Reform advertisements that people are sharing and engaging in, and who's paying for it all? Private people getting loads of stuff printed out rather than Reform paying for it, and Reform people getting elected and then continuing to have their adverts on it, and then it's declared for Parliament. Although Sarah Poochin doesn't have a telephone number, you can't ring her up. It seems like as the MPs are ditching all contact forms and they're trying to go into a social media based contact. I think they're trying to get rid of the telephone, and even I think if they could, they'd try and get rid of the address just writing in the post as well, if they could, right? They only really want to do email or social media, but the social media is not even being run lawfully, so it's a bit of a mess at the moment. The Nick Clegg, Mark Zuckerberg video, I think, is probably the most relevant thing to all this. Because you've got the guy, Mark Zuckerberg, who's been turned into a multi-billionaire, having these big, feasts with Trump, and then they're getting all these ballrooms built onto the White House, ball and chain rooms onto the White House, building themselves into the actual American. If Mark Zuckerberg's not happy enough with himself building himself a war bunker retreat, he's actually building himself into the White House with a part of the ballroom, right? Or Google is, or whatever, right? Sergey Brin and Google are. I'm quite surprised that Mark Zuckerberg's nuclear bunker retreat isn't under the White House, or isn't got a connection to it, right? Isn't like somehow he's got a tunnel going from his own nuclear bunker to the White House's nuclear bunker, I wouldn't be surprised, We might find Hitler's body down there somewhere in between, when they're digging the tunnels out, that's a joke, by the way, but, it's just ridiculous. And then Nick Clegg, Nick Clegg was presenting that radio show. If you would have been a voter in Sheffield Hallam when he was running, you could have gone in there and you could have said, look, he's been getting extra popularity from this radio show, right, over other candidates, and he didn't pay for that broadcast. It's been paid, all of the transmitting and, the production of the show. He didn't pay for that, right? But it's helped him keep a popular edge, right? But it would have been the same situation, really, like what Graham Moore's in now with Sarah Poochin, right? It would have been that kind of thing, but against the Lib Dems. And, it would have probably cost £5,000. And, he might have, Nick Clegg might have challenged whether he filled the form in properly. And then they're trying to make out that, you might have to pay costs. But I looked at it and you don't actually... the cost can be absorbed by the local governance area, according to what I looked at, for sure. And then Nick Clegg ends up being Deputy Prime Minister, and then all this is continuing after he did cheat himself, and then he's got the cheek when he's put in charge of Facebook after Lord Allen of Hallam has been on there and then becomes, on the Ofcom board. He's got the cheek to say with Mark Zuckerberg, oh yeah, the government are a little bit behind with the legislation because these platforms are rushing ahead. Oh, those platforms that you're advertising on Parliament website, those ones, are they rushing ahead, Nick? Oh yes, like Blue Sky, X, Facebook and Twitter, they're the platforms that are rushing ahead, the ones that we're advertising on our MP contact pages where, we're rushing ahead because we've even got next year's election material up there, right? Oh look, it's, David Davis MP, he's rushing ahead because, he's even got his election material ready for next year. When he runs to stand again, he won't have to put any more on. He's already got the vote for David Davis, adverts on there. All he has to do is just edit it from David Davis MP and put a David Davis, and then after I win again, I'll put it back again. But I can leave all those, photographs on there. Vote for David Davis MP, right? Vote for Conservative or whatever he's defected to now. Big, he might even have a Big Brother watch party. And Rachel Reeves as well with her YouTube channel, although they don't advertise the YouTube channels on the Parliament website, not on the contact pages for MPs, but they do actually promote YouTube like they're using it for the courts now. The court services are actually, but they don't use the YouTube logo or sort of promote it in that way, but it's making use out of the platform for government processes and procedures. Even the petitions committee are doing it now, the e-petitions, who are rejecting half of our petitions, yet when they have these debates, they're putting that on YouTube. So, and then they've got the Parliament channel as well, aren't they, and stuff like that. So they're really implementing these platforms into government now. But the Advertising Standards Authority aren't governing it properly. They're not telling people to take anything down. Yet it's having an effect. Someone sees it, and in fact, that's like reach. That's exposure, right? Now, the closer it is to the election, the easier it is to prove that it affected the election. But if you've got those people, voting for that MP, and then they're going on the website 365 days a year, they're really getting flashed with all the, vote for that MP again and again and again. And, rather than if they change their mind the year after, they've had 365 days of advertising influence when you're only meant to get it through the election period, right? So there's something wrong here with how they're going about doing this. And I think they just don't care. I think they've got this strategy and they've got this plan, and they know where they're going with it, and in order to get there, they've just got to say, oh, fuck it, we don't care, and just they're setting everything up and planning for when they finish this. That's what they're doing, right? They've got the Advertising Standards Authority, blah, 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 Electoral Commission, all set up for when they finished it, and they're in the process of going to it, but they're getting to it by illegal means. And all the time, there's this adverse effect of elections imposing an influence, and it's actually managing to make some of these parties just hold on to their relevance or stay relevant in the face of a lot of independent and minority alternatives rising up. I know the Conservatives aren't too popular at the moment, right? But and people's independent causes and campaigns should be protected to get things put through private bills and petition, which we're not being allowed to do. And that actually is meant to be a main part of Parliament. In the 1688 Bill of Rights, it says that Parliaments are to be called for resolving grievances and mending and strengthening the laws equally as much. But they've actually, managed to pretty much take us out of the journals nearly, and not really have that many paper petitions presented, and then what's left out of the digital ones, they're rejecting 3/4 of them. So we're being scammed. Independent voices and powers are being totally scammed, obstructed, and gypped off, right? And apparently we can't even accuse them of any wrongdoing. Who can? And you can only accuse those departments of wrongdoing, right? Through the ombudsman, right? But how do you accuse Parliament of wrongdoing? Well, they're trying to make out that you can't, but you can. Then you do it through petitioning Parliament itself, because it can't be challenged in any place out of Parliament, so it has to be petitioned into Parliament to be resolved. And you're meant to have these committees sorting things out, and they're meant to be prosecuting other MPs. They were prosecuting the election petitions in there, but now they're all like up each other's rear ends. They're all like, oh, and the right honourable gentleman and my good friend there, and this and that, and they're all into the etiquette, even though they're meant to be in opposition. But they all want, they don't want to impeach each other. But yeah, as soon as the police, if it's Dan Norris has touched a kid's leg, or Patrick Spence, or Mike Amesbury punches someone, then that's it. It's open season, right? And the police can do it. But they don't want to be democratically accountable to us unless the police have prosecuted them officially, or because the police say they're criminals and because the CPS say they're criminals, then they must be. But then notice that they've still got to come to us to do the recall petition, because they can't be actually removed unless we remove them, unless they stand down. So, but yeah, that was only meant to enhance their accountability, not replace it, right? And we're meant to be able to collect signatures to remove them actually whenever we want. Like, you just collect signatures against Keir Starmer to remove him, right? But people don't think to do that. And then you get there's a lot of misleading going on by the Jamie Stone saying, oh, yeah, there's this Michael Westwood petition about college general election, but, we can't really do anything about it. There's no point signing it, really, not discouraging you from signing it, but, don't bother, because you know what's going to come of it, what's going to happen, right? So, what's the point in signing? You might as well just say, Jamie Stone might as well just say, don't sign the petition, And that's similar to this thing with the forfeiture committee and the petitions against honours. They've got a committee for it. If they've got a committee for it, it's something you can petition about. And this is the problem, and this is now Richard Maskell's doing this, Duke of York thing with Andrew. But, and this is we're back to the square one now, where I said, this Andrew thing, can they even remove his title? Love or hate the royal family, it's not easy to do anything about it, I don't necessarily think. And do we want to? This is the thing. If we've got all these Knights of the Realm who are corrupt, like, Blair and Clegg and company and Starmer, have been undermining our rights in the Crown Prosecution Service and working towards this Bill Gates handshake global regime thing, which has got to be foreign influence on elections and democracy. I mean, is starting, to take action against, the royal family, like, what that other Graham Smith campaign's doing, Republic UK. Is that saying, are they giving way to Bill Gates's global empire instead? Rand Paul supposedly doesn't believe that America should, because he's opposing digital identity. So I don't know what's going on there with Rand Paul and, Bill Gates. But at the same time, Trump is, doing this operating. Trump is having great fun playing the Goldfinger character and cutting a hole in the wall in the side of the White House as if it's like Fort Knox to build his ballroom so they can have some big party in the Kremlin, Putin would have been having if Corbyn would have become Prime Minister, but in the White House, will they be having a big party in the White House if Bill Gates, gets his global regime? Although Rand Paul's meant to stop him, but who's part of this regime? It seems like Zuckerberg, Google, Sergey Brin, Amazon, they're all in on it, right? And these are the type of people who are funding this ballroom, right, and building themselves into the White House, short of Mark Zuckerberg joining the tunnels underneath the ground, you know. So maybe they can have maybe they might actually make the ballroom bomb-proof. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg, maybe like if there's a nuclear war and they have to take us all out, maybe Mark Zuckerberg could travel to the ball underneath from his nuclear bunker, and maybe like they could be having the party while they set the nuclear missiles off. Maybe they could be partying into oblivion. Maybe like, you know, that's the plan. Maybe like they're gonna like have a party in the White House, in the ballroom, and they're going to be actually having that party while the nuclear missiles are being launched, but they're completely protected from it, you know, and then afterwards Zuckerberg can go back home through his secret joint tunnel underneath the earth or whatever, you know, like, you know, you shall go to the ball, and his pumpkin carriage can take him, you know, from, you know, A to B. Maybe he's got some kind of like on one of those Bond films, they've got the monorail thing, you know, in the henchman's base or something, you know, like on whatever it is, Moonraker or God knows whatever, whichever episode it is, or, you know, when it goes on the monorail, maybe Zuckerberg's going to have his own monorail, you know, this is the thing. Maybe they will be partying, maybe that'll be their party, you know, maybe the earth will be on fire while they're having the party, and then after it's finished, you know, the smoke's settled, then they can start again with Bill Gates' new global empire of what's left. I don't know. That's, you know, I'm not saying that's what they're doing. That's just like a bit of comedy, but, you know, we don't know, you know, what's going to happen to England if we don't have a king to petition and our rights, you know. But, you know, how can we have some massive empire dictate that, all right, we're going to run the world now, right? Because it goes against all election principles, which is why I think they've got Nigel Farage swanning around in Australia, you know. Farage definitely is like doing some kind of global rep job at the moment. They've got him popping up with Trump, then he's in Australia. He's knocking around the whole world, but he's not even apparently been there for his constituents in Parliament, hardly. That's meant to be a breach of privilege, by the way, in William Prim books, right? You know, what Farage is doing now. And instead he's pushing his opinions, views and politics on the whole world. Kind of a little bit like how Gates is, but he says that he's wanting to stop all this, you know, immigration into England, but he doesn't necessarily say that he's against all this digital ID, and the way that he's going about doing it, I don't think it's lawful, right? If you've got a member of Parliament in the British Parliament, they surely should be a very, very busy person, right? They won't have time to do Australian radio shows and things like this. And they're not meant to be promoting themselves. He's still continuing to persist this behaviour that he was doing on Talking Pints, right? I don't know why that he wanted to be an MP. He should have just been a demagogue, you know. But that's effectively what Gates is doing. But Farage has been a demagogue by, you know, telling countries, you know, really what, you know, how the world should or shouldn't be run and what shouldn't be going on. But Gates is actually putting mechanisms of implementation in to actually take governance over the world. And at the same time, you know, we really don't know what the hell's going on with the British government. We know they're breaking the law with these social platforms and they've been working with them. I think completely and totally illegally and unlawfully. To get to where they are now, they've been breaking the law. So I can't see how any of the parliaments have been legitimate. I'd like to have known what those MPs were doing with their private election websites before 2005. Were they quite strict with them? Were they, you know, running for election, got all the election material on there, and then once they got elected, were they using that webpage for an MP? Or was it the party political page, you know, like was it just a page on the Lib Dem page? I don't know, but that's the thing. There was the least of our interests in 2005 because I wasn't interested in that. You know, I don't know, nobody else were interested in that. I wasn't interested in it. I was going out with my mates, right? So this is the thing, you know, what have these people been up to and how long have they been up to it for? And now that it comes to our attention, we need more people to look into it and be interested in it and be interested in the law and the basis behind it and how, Spitting Image, definitely something was going on there with having Thatcher as a caricature and having, these Lib Dem caricatures. Some of them actually even had their rosettes and voting and stuff like that. He was trying to make comedy out of it, but I think that Thatcher did get a few more extra 1,000 votes from that programme. I think that a caricature gained her a few thousand votes. Now, that might not be much, but I think it contributed towards an election. You have to prove that. But it would have been provable at the time. You see, this is the thing. The longer it is from the election, the harder it is to prove. You would have had to... Well, actually, she's got quite a small electorate, right? If you had a well-funded legal case, you could have... Now, if she had a constituency area, if you could have afforded a survey, if you could have afforded to survey all of the people who turned out to vote, either by going around doors or ringing them up by the telephone, it's 10p a call or whatever, you might have been able to... Oh, no, how many people did vote for us? So you wouldn't have needed to... You might not have needed to ask the people who didn't vote for her, but... say she had 20,000 signatures, right? You could effectively have made contact with 20,000 people and say, by the way, have you seen Margaret Thatcher on Spitting Image? What did you think to it? And if you said, oh yeah, we liked it, we're funny, and you're like, that's funny. All these people did see it, they thought it was funny, and they liked it, and they went and voted for it, right? That could have proved that it got those extra 1,000 or whatever votes, and that there you've got a case. You've got a case then. You've actually got a case in an election petition court with evidence that those people saw Thatcher's caricature, they liked it, and it made it a lot more likeable, and due to that, an extra 1,000 and odd people turned out to vote for her, right? But I don't know if she would have still won without those votes or not. I didn't look. I need to look at who came second, but if those votes would have been taken off and she'd have lost or come second place, then that's the thing. But you can still say that it's undue influence, You could still say that, some of the people didn't like her character and didn't vote for that party, and therefore there was an undue influence, and so forth. But this is what election propaganda is actually all about, and actually I'm quite surprised that a lot more people are interested in it, particularly the BBC. But I think the BBC, once you get into all these Jeremy Vine programmes when he's dancing around on a stage as a performer, and he's kind of doing theatrics, and it's also entertaining people at the same time, not just delivering the election results. And he's it becomes almost like Parliament's contact pages for MP are promoting and advertising YouTube, X and Blue Sky. It's almost like the BBC are kind of they're in the end there can only be one, the Highlander. It's there are only two parties, and they're only relevant, and we're not going to mention, focus, or talk about any of us. Once you stand so close to the speaker with the electric guitar, you start to get a feedback, and you get that screechy sound. And once you get these political parties rolling with their campaigns and people voting for them, and once they start getting onto the TV, you get this feedback loop, a little bit like when you stand close to the speaker with the guitar and it gets that feedback sound, right? So, and that is actually undue. That is an example of a basis or a way to exemplify what undue influence is, right? Because you're getting sounds out the speaker which are actually influencing the noise, and it's actually adding to the song and the tune. It's an additional sound to what should be being played, an additional noise. So you're getting all this cumulative Labour Conservative feedback through, like Jeremy Vine and all kinds of stuff like that. It's not enough people have been interested in that area of law. Not enough people have been interested in that area of law. Not enough people have had enough money for the deposit on it. And then you get all this ridiculous, I don't know what the hell Sarah Poaching and a team are playing at with all this, challenging it before they've even heard it and all this nonsense. So, but by the time they're finished, then I think Farage is breaking all these laws on purpose because they're hoping to, shed them off and scrap them. And they're, Gates has declared this thing. And I only think Farage, as long as, we're protecting our borders, I think Farage seems quite happy with all this digital takeover. I think that the main parties should be disqualified from elections. I think that they've participated and engaged in widespread election corruption for a number of years. I don't think that the last few parliaments have been legitimate. I think that none of the legislation being put through is legit. And I think that they should be disqualified. I think Reform, the Lib Dems, the Greens, Conservatives and Labour should be disqualified from elections permanently. You can do that. You can disqualify candidates from standing again. And I think you can disqualify parties, or if not, you should be able to. And I think that we should have some fresh independent candidates or minority parties. But that's the thing, can that happen in America? Apparently, it can. It's like when you see the Americans had a really good electoral process when they founded their constitution, and then Barack Obama was rubbishing it, saying, "Oh, things have got to evolve." No, actually, no. What Barack Obama meant to say was, "No, you've got to take over these elections and become more powerful and dominate them and rule, and then there can only be one party, or two people, that when they're already talking about, it can only be, Ted Cruz or someone else or whatever, and that's who it's going to be. You're actually saying that it can only be this or that. So there isn't actually competition. And I know you can sort of say in the Olympics, the odds are on this person in the Olympics, or the odds are on this horse in a race, or they're the favourite or whatever. But no matter how much, this is the thing when it comes to that, right? No matter how much you say the horse is better, actually it doesn't make any of the other horses any worse, right? Theoretically, you can say, this horse is the best horse or this horse is going to win, but, you might be lying. But the fact that you're saying it actually might not win. I mean, if you profiled it and, you set your statistics out, fair enough. But it's very different in an election, because in an election, when what you say and what people believe affects the outcome, right? Because the people are voting, right? If you go to a racehorse race, right, the spectators aren't running in the race, the horse is running, right? So the performance of the horse wins or loses the race, right? But in an election, the punters decide who wins, right? So you can have Nigel Farage stood there, and you can have Sarah Poaching stood there. They could even be having sex. They could be doing porn moves, right? He could be doing it from behind or whatever, like on Alan Bastard, the New Statesman, right? But this is the thing. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest or something like that, right? The punters decide who wins. The candidates are all stood there, but we vote on it. Like ringing and vote from home shows and stuff like that. No matter if you think they've been cheated or not. In a betting race, actually, the people in the crowd supposedly can shout all they want, or boo or cheer or whatever. But it's actually all down to whether the horse actually runs fast enough or not, right? Because the people only bet on it, whether they win money or not. It does that their betting only benefits them, right? Whether they put a bet on or not only benefits them, right? It doesn't actually benefit the horse. Only the horse's health benefits the horse. The health of the other horses, not actually the punters. But in an election, it's the actual punters who do the voting. Now, obviously, Farage ain't going to help himself if he's don't perform or whatever. But this is the thing, it's about, it's a consensual social order, which is why you're not meant to have. This is why people aren't been. You're not meant to be helping them. You're not meant to be advertising and promoting them or encouraging people. You're meant to, have an opinion on what you want a lot of the country to be, and then you're meant to go vote yourself, right? Without there are legal requirements around, who can affect you, and it's not meant to be Bill Gates. It's not meant to be Bill Gates who's like, hey, I'm going to do this global thing and take over the laws of your country. So either you're with me or against me, and you really don't want to be against me because you know what happened to Boris Johnson's next door neighbour, or Andrew Bridgen, saying, Andrew Bridgen got expelled from the Tory party. You're up against all these, these big, very big influential forces. You don't want anything to go wrong, Andrew, do you? Are you threatening me? These threats, they actually are threats, aren't they? Is Bill Gates, by having a virus, right, in some sort of container that he's invented all these microbugs that can make everyone allergic to meat, we wouldn't want them to be spilled everywhere, would we? These accidents can happen. Are you threatening us, Bill? This is the thing. Is Bill's possession of, and the fact that he created ridiculous superbugs that could be a potential global threat if they were released. Is that a threat? Is that a leverage on, you better go with his platform? And by the way, he'll be checking up on social media because now consent to accept, you've got to give up all your private information to these platforms, and he'll know what you've been talking about or what websites you've been looking at or, whether you've been supporting these policies or not, You're getting into that kind of area of stuff, which is quite dark and sinister, global, contrived plans. You're not supposed to have a contrived plan in an election. Now, how big is this contrived plan and how contrived has it been and how long has it been contrived for? Because this is like the thing when you get onto, local government, they've got strategy, planning strategy. Well, the whole thing's a strategy. And when the whole thing's a strategy, we're being planned against. And part of the strategy is consent to accept. Yet, how can that be lawful within the European Union of Convention of Human Rights, ECHR or whatever, when you got the right to privacy, family privacy? But by the time that these companies have had you submit into their policies, or else you'll be excluded from, social interactions on all the main platforms that Parliament are advocating on their website to everyone, right? And, the BBC said this really cool, like Facebook. Then, if you don't agree to those policies, those platforms, you can't really participate, right? But yeah, that's against the European Convention of Human Rights. And now Cilla Braverman jumps out of a birthday cake and goes, surprise, now we're going to scrap it all, right? But only because a bunch of EU migrants got themselves a decent lawyer and took us to court and then said that they've got the same rights as us. But how is it that all these, like Huckleberry Finn or whatever, some migrant paddling on a boat, where are they getting these fucking lawyers from? I mean, where are these Huckleberry Finns? Where are these, like, migrants with a paddle on a dinghy? Where are they getting all these international human rights lawyers from? Where are they actually getting them from? Where are they coming from? Are they pro bono? Did Tony Blair pay for them? Did did somebody turn up with a trench coat and said, "Do you want to buy a watch?" Or do you want a decent lawyer? He's meet some agent at the beach. Like they've been infiltrating those camps and finding out what they're all up to. Some companies apparently were set up to provide them with certain equipment and direct them to certain places. Were there some companies set up who would provide them and direct them to certain lawyers, right? Whatever the case, we are not happening across these pro bono English citizens with money, working ones, or ones who aren't working in England but, entitled to free legal help, entitled to legal aid or whatever. Why aren't we happening upon these big human rights lawyers who are happy to prove that Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky and X have been completely and totally coercing us against the European Convention on Human Rights and Privacy the whole time since 2000 and around since 2005ish, right? Who's prosecuting Sergey Brin? Who's prosecuting Neil Mohan? Who's prosecuting, Mark Zuckerberg? Mark Zuckerberg cannot, they won't prosecute him because he's one of Trump's henchmen. He's one of Trump's ballroom guests. He's one of Trump's power party. He's one of his banquet meal guests. He's one of the American empire primary key workers, one of the kingpins, and he's building himself an underground retreat bunker. Yeah, Assange got chased around the fucking halfway around the world for a little video clip when Zuckerberg is facilitating Facebook groups taking down privileged material, which potentially could help to oppose these parties. So I don't like it. The whole lot of them are conniving and corrupt, and Zuckerberg. He was like, he's I'm in, he's up for it, he's like, yeah, let's make a shitload of money and get rich, and sell crappiest adverts to people that you could possibly imagine, waste people's time, make them hang around waiting for, even though we boosted the internet speed, to 4G, even though videos literally load instantly, we'll still spam you with these crap ads because I'm making an absolute killing out of it, and we don't provide anything for free. I mean, what do you think we are? New altruistic cloned humans who just go around doing charitable work for people, Who do you think we are? Kind people. Do you think we do things for nothing, right? We're doing this for the money, right? And to take over the world with a new global regime network that, is going to be policy driven, because Mark Zuckerberg is a policy driven person, administrative law, that's the future, consent, submit, accept, YouTube policy procedure style run government, consent, submit, accept, and we'll take a look at it and say no thanks, this is the thing, not this electoral based stuff. So, and how, they had the Aladdin program on the American computer system for God knows how long. The fact that these major parties have been behind all this from the start is not very good, really. And they've had the feedback effect through the media, and it's been contributing a lot to the noise of it all and the hype of it all. Giving them a lot of extra exposure and a lot of extra sound, just like you got a lot of extra sound in a speaker, right? I don't know what, and I don't know which is the worst part of the problem, whether it's the police chiefs undermining the rights, but they think they're doing us. No, they're not doing us a favour. They've got a political opinion now. You weren't, under the American Constitution and under the English law when they first actually started the Met Police, you weren't meant to vote if you were a police officer. So and that's where a lot of the basis of the Representation of the People Act comes from. When, police officers weren't meant to have a political opinion or a vote, but now the police chief's got his, press office and he's, crushing the, Paul Golding's van, and he wants to have a play. He wants to play. He wants to play ball with them. He wants to. I want to play. I want to flex my WWF wrestler muscles, flex my sweaty police shirt, like rip the sleeves of my police biceps, I want to play as well, So all like some kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger character, I want to play as well, Police chiefs want to play rather than keeping out of it and just sticking to their, they're not even governing elections properly anyway. So, the police actually are self-serving now. And I think that the police are the same problem as the Electoral Commission and the advertising standards and Ofcom, right? And eventually they wanted these to be global governance regimes to grow into Bill Gates' global governance. But they're not taking stuff down now that's supposed to be up. They're not doing the job. They're not actually doing what they're meant to be there for. And at the end of the day, I think that they're all a waste of money. I actually think that all these Ofcom, ASA, blah, 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 someone's made a shitload of money out of building those. Someone's made a hell of a lot of money out of planning them. They've put all this policy in. What is wrong with good old school, good old education, forget the conservatives in Oxford, Oxford dons, right? What is wrong with going to school, someone teaching you how to do a prosecution, right, or defending yourself, and then, going down the, Gumpter office if you want a warrant, and then just prosecuting the cunts yourself, right? I think it's a complete and utter waste of time, all these departments, because if someone's broke election law and you're annoyed with it, if we weren't being completely and totally ripped off by these lawyers, what they've done is the lawyers have got so greedy and they won't do anything for nothing. They won't work for £300 or £400. Some people are going to work every day of the week, for £400-500. These people won't do anything unless it's a grand. They won't even pick up the telephone. No, I ain't got the capacity. It's not fair actually. And then we've got the Crown Prosecution Service who are going to be on, lower wages as lawyers, but they just want to do what they want to do on their tests and they've got their own agenda. If we shouldn't have the Crown Prosecution Service, you should just have prosecutors, right? And then you get a warrant, you say, I want to prosecute Mike Graham, and then you can prosecute the cunt, and that's it. Either you win or you lose, done, right? What's all this 70,000 fucking complaints and Ofcom bullshit, right? It's a complete and total absolute waste of time and money, and we're actually being extorted and we're actually being held to ransom by some of these lawyers because actually they don't want us to have any power. They don't want us to have powers at all. And you might say, oh, well, regulation. Well, you have the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the Bar Standards, You got the Solicitors, that's two organisations. You got the Solicitors Regulation Authority, then you got the Bar Standards, and then you got the CPS. Supposedly they've got their own complaints procedure, which is meant to be good enough, but it's not. I mean, how many do you need? It's like this blockchain thing, you got the, you've got the parental controls on the kid's phone that you can put on password. Then you've got the parental controls on the hub. Now they're wanting actually, something on the website itself. It's like blockchain. It's like, I mean, how many organisations do you need to fucking prosecute someone? They've got the police, then they've got the CPS, then they've got the Bar Standards, and they've got the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and they've got the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office. How many and none of them will act. None of them will act. This is the thing. How many complaints does it take? I must have about, 1,000 complaints or more over the last few years. But you can't get any of these to act. None of them. They're saying that there isn't anything wrong. They're defending for the team. And the adverts and the corporate side of it, well, they're defending for the corporate side of it, the Advertising Standards Authority. I don't think that they're... I think that it's all this Bill Gates global network. And I don't think that they're there for us to help us at all. So, that's my decision, that's my opinion at the moment anyway.